Good afternoon. We want to welcome everyone to the Advanced RI-CTR REDCap Level Up Your Skills seminar. Today's speaker is Chris Breault, a senior data scientist with the Survey, Qualitative, and Applied Data Research Corps, otherwise known as SQUAD. We just want to let you know that this seminar is being recorded today. And if anyone has any questions as Chris goes through his presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. And everyone will be answering questions at a couple of points during the seminar. So I will turn it over to Chris now.
All right, well, thank you very much. First off, I just wanted to mention that this talk was originally going to be for just a handful of people, and I envisioned it more as an interactive discussion. Then I found out yesterday that about 60 people are registered, so I had to quickly pivot. So I know there's going to be a lot of people who have never used REDCap before, and there are going to be people that use it every day and are quite well versed in it. So I think this talk is kind of going to be in that sweet spot of the middle. So I promise I won't be offended if you drop off because you feel like it is meant for you if it's too advanced or if it's stuff that you already know. But hopefully, even if you are well versed in it, you'll learn something new in this talk today. All right. So for those who don't know anything about REDCap, what it stands for is it's a research electronic data capture. It's basically a secure web application for building and managing databases and surveys. The key feature, the biggest thing, is its ease in sending online surveys to participants or whoever you would like. They can easily answer these questions from the comfort of their home or any computer, any smartphone, tablet, things like that. You can send them as anonymous surveys where you get responses you don't know who it is, or you can send out personalized survey invitations where we do keep track of who's answering. Some behind the scenes things, this trails for audit. You can see who's doing what behind the scenes, when things get edited, when things get created, things like that. There's a lot of user control that you can use with it, where you can limit who can download data, who can see things, members of your staff. If you only want them to see certain pieces, you can do that within REDCap quite easily. And a nice feature that REDCap has is you can easily export data to analyze, and it right through the system itself. You can easily export it into SPSS or R and things like that. So that piece is quite advantageous. So to kind of give you an overview, so here are some of the topics that will be covered today. First off, kind of start with some common mistakes that people make, especially for those of you that are newer to REDCap. And then some topics I'll go over: branching logic, piping and field embedding, calculated fields and conditional logic, user roles and data access groups, action tags, alerts and notifications, the multi-language management piece, and then some limitations towards the end. So some common design mistakes is with REDCap, case matters. When you're writing, you're giving variable names, or if you're writing syntax to calculate fields, everything must be in lowercase. So as you can see, the first one, the field name has the capital F and the capital N, and that will not work because it has a capital letter. So you have to make sure that everything is lowercase. And another thing with people that are just starting out, people might overuse text fields, whereas they should try to lean more towards using like radio buttons and specific responses. Like if you have a Likert scale that goes to 0 to 5, show them what the actual choices are and hard code those numbers in instead of having the person enter in the data. And if you are using text fields, you want to make sure you put some validation on your field. So if you want to make sure an integer is being entered, you want to change the validation of that text field to allow just integers to be entered in. Because if you leave it open, people may mistakenly put some letters in there, a number with a decimal. So you want to kind of limit what can be entered into your fields. Another thing is long variable names. You want to keep them on the small side especially if you're passing out your data off to your biostatistician. When they're writing their code, they don't want 25-letter variable names. They want it quick and simple. They want to have the consistent naming convention so they can easily tell, okay, all these questionnaires are from the C, all these variables are from the CESD, so they can easily spot that out. So keeping them small and keeping them consistent is the key way to go. One thing that happens a lot is people, you have a project, it's up and running, it's in production, and you realize, oh, you know what, I need to add a new survey. So you can do that, that's not a problem. But once you add it and then you submit changes to be implemented, you need to go back and edit your user rights to make sure that people can see it. Because the default is with REDCap is when you add a new survey that's already in production, it's hidden by default. So you need to go back and edit your user rights so people can see it. That's a question I get a lot is people say, I just created this new survey. I can't see it. I don't know what's going on. It's something as simple as that. And then if you created a longitudinal project, you need to put your event name prior to your variable, so they know which event you're referring to. If it's the baseline visit or is it a 3-month follow-up, you want to put your event name in the front of before your variable. Another thing that you can do to kind of make your job a little bit easier, if you have a lot of users in a project, I would create user roles. So if you have 10 staff, 10 RAs on a project, and you want that they're all going to have the same rights, I would create a user role, put that group of folks into the same in that group, and then if you have to edit their rights, you only need to do it one time. You don't have to do it 10 times for each individual person. So it kind of saves you some time there. Another thing to kind of keep an eye on is if you're adding additional options while your project's in production, you want to be careful of changing values that we already have data on. So you can see this very important question about what your favorite city in Rhode Island is. They had 3 options, but they realized, you know what? Oh, we should add Newport to the list. So you don't want to make Newport, you don't want to change your values that are associated behind the scenes. So you don't want to make Providence was originally 2, Warwick was 3. You don't want to put Newport 2 and then Providence 3, Warwick 4, because that changes all the previous people's data that was entered. You'll end up having incorrect data. So what you want to do is you want to make Newport the 4, but you can just change the order. So if you want to keep them in alphabetical order, you just kind of pop your new response up in the middle so that they stay in alphabetical order, but you have the correct value there. Once you start using REDCap, and you want to branching logic is helpful. It helps guide what questions participants should be answering and which ones they should not. It's used for when you want to hide a field. So if a person is, you're doing the person says, I don't smoke, you don't want them to answer two questionnaires regardless regarding smoking, because they don't smoke, so there's no need for them to answer those questions. So if the logic used is met, it will show that field on the screen. It makes benefits for using branching logic is your surveys are cleaner and shorter. The participant will only see the questions that are relevant to them. You get better data quality, prevents irrelevant or contradictory data being entered. It helps support complex study design. So if you have a longitudinal study and you have participants in one group, you can show just the questions that are relevant to that group, and the other questions you can hide other questions that aren't as relevant. It's also you can kind of personalize your workflow as well. So here is if you're just starting to use branching logic, this is kind of, if you're just starting out, I suggest using the drag and drop logic builder to start, to kind of give you a sense of how it works, how you plan on using it. So this is if you have multiple surveys, here's where you select your survey. It will give you a list of all your variables there, and then you just drag them over, and it shows if you want to have them all true or any of them are true. And I'll kind of go into that in a little bit. So for the example to the right, this is any true. So they want this particular example shows if they're a female and or they're black or African American, then those participants will show up. So so if you were to start using the advanced branching logic, you're going to start typing in your syntax instead of using the drag and drop. You just got to remember when to use your ands and when to use your ors. If all are true, you want to use and. So for example, this one says, let's say one is male. So if this person's male and they're over the age of 10 or more, that will show that person. Whereas any is true, it's either the person's male or they're greater than or equal to 10 years of age. If you start, using more advanced logic, you can use the control logic order where you want to put parentheses in. Whereas this example is if the participant is male and greater than or equal to 50, or they're female and we want them to be greater than or equal to 60. So that we want to put the parentheses in to control for that, because if the parentheses were not in there, it would be you would not get the results that you're looking for. Something to look out for is if you want to show fields that if you want to make it that it's not blank, there's actually something written into that field. You want to do the greater than less than symbol here means not equal to. So and then you put two single quotes. So it's not equal to null. If you want to show a field, if it is null, then you do equals the single quotes. Something that usually trips up people, and even I'll forget from time to time, is the syntax that you use for the checkboxes and check all that apply. Because it's a check all apply, it's set up a little differently. If it was a regular one, this syntax would be fine. But because it is a check all apply, you put what the value of that field is, and then equals 1. Because for checkboxes, the default is 0. And then the 1 is when it gets selected. So piping in field embedding, this is where you can start to make your forms a little bit more customized, a little bit better looking. So what the piping does is it inserts a value from a previous field. So what you do is you put whatever that variable is that you want to show later on, you put it in brackets, and then whatever that value is will show up on a different form. A common use is used for personalization. You can show the participant's name or ID. You can show in branching context, you can kind of show previous answers. You can, if you're seeing someone a month later, you can say, you previously last month when we saw you, you answered XYZ to this question. Are you still feeling the same way? This kind of gives them a reference to what they answered prior. You can create calculations and then display those computed results quite easily. And then for instructions, you can give them tailored guidance on prior responses, kind of what I touched upon earlier. So here's an example of the piping. So you can see, you enter the first name, last name, and then you can have it show up in a message. So the top part is what you see behind the scenes, and then below is how it looks on the survey view. So you can see how it easily pipes whatever information you want to show up on the screen. And then some things to watch out for when you're using piping is if you are using repeating instruments, you want to make sure that the event name is in brackets prior to your field name. And if you want to reference a specific instance, for example, you want say a question, this questionnaire is answered 5 different times, and you want to show the first instance, you want to put the number one at the end of it. So it'll be like your event name, field name, and then the number one. Or if you want the second, you can put the number two, and so on and so forth. And if you're piping in a field that does not have any data, what you'll see is on the screen is it just gives you an underscore, like a line as to where data should have been, but nothing's getting piped in because you don't have that particular variable was not filled out. Now, embedding is where you can really tailor your screen for the participant sees. You can instead of having it the usual kind of bland form, you can get it more enhanced and more condensed too. So instead of using the brackets the brackets that you use for the piping for field embedding, you're going to use, I don't know what these are called. I'm going to call them the curlicue brackets. You want to put the curlicue brackets and then put your variable name in between there. But you just can't put that field name in. You actually have to create the field first and then embed it. And then if you are going to be embedding fields, they have to be on the same form that you're using. So you can't embed something if say you have five forms on your project. You can't take a variable that's on form 1 and embed it on form 3. So that variable has to be on the same form that you're embedding it. And there's the benefit for embedding is you get an improved user experience. It makes the forms feel more natural and almost conversational, and it reduces the cognitive load for a person to, everything is much cleaner. You're going to get better data accuracy. It helps the users understand what's being asked. It reduces misinterpretation of isolated fields. You get a cleaner and more compact layout. It gives more customized feel and design to it. And what's good about it is you can make it match, make it more closely relate to some hard copy forms that you may get if you're having staff. If they're receiving hard copy forms from somewhere and you want the form to look the same for your staff to easily enter. Using the embedding is beneficial in that manner. So here's an example of the embedding. So there's a first name, last name, and what you'll do is you put that in a descriptive text field. That this full name is a descriptive text, and then you pipe them in, and you can tell if your fields are embedded because the green message will show up on your form as you're creating it, and then this tells you easily shows you that there's embedded fields here. So instead of what normally would have, you'd have one line for first name, one line for second name, last name, excuse me. It takes up a lot of space where you can just kind of put this on one line and it looks a little bit cleaner. Once you get used to using embedding, you can really do a lot of interesting things with it and make your form with a lot of data all kind of pop. And so you can you're asking multiple, like with this form, you're asking multiple questions all within one kind of key block of things. So here's an example of field embedding, branching logic, and action tags, which we will I'll touch on later on. So you can see the question is, what's your favorite beverage? This right here, this is your field embedding. So if they were to select other, which has a branching logic here, that the text field will show up. And what we do here is you can put a placeholder in so the text will show. I put a specify here, so it's in very light gray, so they know what needs to go in there. So what happens is when you click on other, the specify box will come up. If they don't select other, you don't see that specify box. So you can do a lot of interesting things with it there. What you can also do is make, as I kind of touched upon before, is you get some colors. like for this, for example, is a screener summary for a project. So you can easily see after potential participants were screened, what what was the end result of their screener, and then if they were ineligible, what were the reasons for it. And if the person if it's pending because they need some more information, you can easily you can easily see right there with those check boxes and any kind of note. So you can make the screens look a lot better. Um, so here's how you can do this is how you do the field embedding. So like I mentioned, you want it to be a descriptive text field. You need to make sure that the rich text editor is checked off, and then you create a table. And you can, you can always add cells, and you can always make it. You want to get your table out there to start, and you can always add more rows, columns, or whatever you need to do. So you're not locked in when you first start, when you first make it. And then you can add some color to it, make it look visually appealing. So you just go to the cell, and then the cell properties will be here. And then if you go to advanced, you can give it some color to liven up the form. So here's an example of so on the left here, this is the REDCap form that's created, and on the right here is a PDF of what was tried to be replicated. So you can see, as you can see, in there is some uniformity between the two, because the goal is to make your form match the PDFs, which makes it easy for entry, less prone for mistakes, and things like that. So I'll just stop right now to kind of if anyone has any questions. I know we kind of went through a few topics pretty quickly, but I just wanted to give people, if anyone has a question, I can answer it now, or we can save it to the end, or if not, I can go on. All right, I can keep going. Attempt to keep going. Oops. All right, so the question is for the piping and field embedding method. If you use embedding for a fill in the blank, if a participant chooses other, when you download the data to SPSS, would this response be under one variable or another variable? Great question. So I'll pop back to here. So it's going to show up on two different variables. So when you download it to SPSS or whatever program, here you'll see the B, like this one's called beverage or BEV. So you're going to get your answer here, and then if they do select other, what they chose will show up here. So it will download in your data as two different variables instead of just one. So for calculated fields, so here's where you can do real-time calculations. These are helpful for your branching logic, or if staff needs to see certain scores to see if an intervention is necessary, or if they need to see data, scored data right away. So if you need to show BMI for whatever reason, you can there's a calculation for that, and then you can use your conditional logic. So it basically says if their weight is greater than or equal to 100, show a 1, otherwise show a 0. That's what the if stands for. And then if you have blanks, so when do you want to use the NAN? When you want to treat your blank fields as a missing rather than a 0. So if you're calculating averages, you want to make sure that you're using the NAN. So for example, let's say you have a question that has you have an NA on it that has a value of 99. So you don't want that 99 to show up in your calculation. So what you do is create an if statement. So if your field name is less than 99, you're gonna keep whatever value it is. Otherwise, you're gonna put this in in its place, and then the system knows when I'm calculating averages off of that, I treat it as missing. And then you can also kind of get fancy, and you can start doing nested ifs. Um, if the score of your measure is greater than 10, I want it to show high on the screen. Otherwise, if the score is greater than 5, show a medium, and then your last scenario is it's going to show low. So this way, the staff can easily see what if their score is in a trouble zone. Just for one thing to keep in mind is for calculations, it should be used as a tool and not as data. So what should be done is when you download everything, you're gonna get your calculated variables, but I suggest having your calculations redone via scoring syntax during your analysis, just in case something has changed in the data and it didn't recalculate. So I always just make sure that the calculations are redone again. So when do you use when do you use sum and when do you use the plus sign? This is something that I always forget, and I'll have to reference because they're very similar. So if the first way, when you use sum, if one of the values is blank, you'll get a sum even if there is a blank value. So for example, the one that's listed there, it shows there's 4 variables. If question 3 happens to be blank, you'll still get a sum on all of them. If you use the plus symbol, you're only going to get a response if every question has a value. So if question 3 is blank, you're not going to get a summed response for that if you use the plus. Another thing to avoid is using the today in your calculated fields, because every time you open up that form and save it, it's going to recalculate everything. So you want to calculate off of a screening date or an enrollment date or another hard-coded date instead of today. So there's a question that's perfect timing is what would you recommend if we have a calculated field and we want the results available to staff, but not the participant in real time? Right now we have a calculated field, but then we have a pre-made report that we run during the study visit. So that's one way to have the calculated field hidden. Another way is if your staff is on it at the same time, what you can do is you can hide if your staff is looking at one computer and they're answering at the same time. You can hide the result. If you do, which I'm going to actually touch upon in a little bit. One of the action tags is you can do hidden survey. So when the participants sees the survey and they're going through the questions, that will be hidden. But if your staff member is looking at it in the data entry view, that field will be shown. That's if you're doing it, especially if you're doing it via Zoom, that's an easy way to do it. But if you're in the room with the participant at the same time, it might be a little trickier. What we've done in the past is if you're passing like a laptop or an iPad back and forth, we would have a message that says, please hand the device to the staff member. They go to the next page, they can see that score and then go to the next page after that and then return the device. So what you're doing currently works, and there's a couple different ways. Those are just kind of some potential options that you could use. So here's a calculated field just for those of you that are newer to REDCap. So you want to make it you change the field type to calculated, and then you can see the calculation that's done right there on the form. So when you have multiple people using the same project, creating user roles helps you helps group people together that will have similar rights. You can limit who can view forms, or download data. You can limit who has rights to rename a record or delete a record. There's a whole plethora of different options on, excuse me, on in the user rights section. One thing that I found helpful is instead of having to, if you don't want to hide an entire form or survey, you can actually hide uh, certain fields from people. So when you create a user role, it in REDCap it gives it a unique number, and so you can reference that number using an action tag in the form in in that variable. And so you can say, if the user role equals whatever that number is, each user role you create has a unique ID. I want that field hidden. So if there's like a certain PHI that maybe you don't want that person to see, or a study group or something along those lines, you can hide certain fields instead of having to hide the entire form. So that's something that could be quite beneficial for folks. Uh, another another piece on top of that is adding data access groups. So if you have a multi-site study and you're in Rhode Island and there's one group in Minnesota, when you add a participant, you can put them in the Rhode Island data access group, and only the staff members that are in that group can see that person's data. So I'll show you here. So what you do is you go to the data access group tab, you create a new group, and then once you create it, and then you can add a person to that group. And then so what happens is every time you create a new record, you select which group they go into. So only if you're in the Rhode Island group, you're only going to see the Rhode Island participants. So that's something that could be very helpful especially for multi-site studies. So here are the action tags that I kind of touched upon earlier. There's a wide range of options out there. And this is actually, when you're writing them, this is the only times that you're not using lowercase. You're actually using all caps. So you start with the at symbol, and you can put more than one at the same time as well. And the good thing about this is it doesn't change your data at all. The raw data behind the scenes stays the same. It's just how the field behaves. So some common ones are hidden if you use hidden. So let's say you have a question in your questionnaire that you realize, oh, we don't want to answer this. We don't want to ask this question anymore. We don't need to use it. But you've already had 25, 50 people fill out that question, and you want to take a look at the data. So if you use hidden, every time you go into a survey, you're not going to see it, but you keep the data. Whereas branching logic, if you use branching logic and it hides that question, you lose the data that's behind the scenes. So you can hide things on forms or surveys. I kind of touched upon it that earlier. And then you can also hide your choice. So if you have a list of like your list of the favorite cities that I did for Rhode Island, you can hide certain choices that you don't want to know. You don't want for new people to see, but it also keeps the data behind the scenes. Another good one to use is the none of the above. So if you have a check all that apply question, and you have 10 choices, and at the very bottom you put none of the above. If you put this none of the above action tag, and you'll put in none of the above equals, let's say it's 99. If a person were to select none of the above and another option, a message comes up saying something along the lines of, you selected none of the above, you can't have more than one choice. And then the placeholder, which we touched upon as well, you can put things behind the to show what you expect to be what the expected value is. So here are some examples that are commonly used. So if you need to calculate dates, so for example, this calculation it gives you the date 7 days after their enrollment. So this is the variable for the enrollment date. This is how many days, because there's a D here, it means days. So this shows 7 days, and then you can add multiple action tags at the same time. So this one has it hidden. Um, so because we're piping in that answer that answer later on. So here's the placeholder specifier that we touched upon before, hidden survey, which we talked about. So for date fields, it's good practice to put max date on there. If if you know the answer is not happening in the future. So if you want to put in when was your last appointment, what is your birthday, whatever, you know it's not going to be in the future. So you put max date and then put it today. And then random order. This shows your so for example, like the beverage list. You can put that random order in your action tag, and so the list of those 5 or 6 beverages that showed up will show up in a random order on the screen each time. Kind of gives you some variability, and if you don't want the same choices to show up in the same order each time. Some additional customizations that you may find helpful. If you need to designate a secondary unique field. So when you create a record in REDCap, the default is record ID. A lot of times I'll change it to screener ID. So everyone gets that screener ID. But for the people enrolled, you may want to give them a separate subject ID. So if you go to do that, you just go into the additional customizations. You just check off the designate a secondary unique field, and then you'll select which field you want that to be. So when you're looking at your record status dashboard, the default is everybody shows up. So you just by eyeing it, you can tell, oh, who's in the study. You can easily see it. But you can also create a custom dashboard that shows just the people that were randomized. So you create the custom record dashboard. You put in, we call this one randomized only. We put some filtering in there. So basically, if their random group is not null, this study had a randomized group of when it was manual entry. I believe they had, if they were siblings or relatives, they would get them to make sure they get the same group. They would manually enter the randomization group of their other yoked person. So you want to make sure that both those fields, or either one of those fields is not blank, so they'll show up in that dashboard. Another thing, if you have a long survey, you may want to put a survey progress on the top of your screen, so your participants kind of have an idea as to how much they have left. They might not. If without it, they'll have no idea. Like, oh, am I getting close? Am I anywhere near the end of this? This is kind of an extensive battery. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do it this way, where you put in where it looks like this, or you can have it kind of this way, where it more creeps along, but doesn't give you the exact percentage. These things you have to manually input them. It doesn't when you put one in, it doesn't say, oh, this is 17.5% done. Like, you have to kind of rough estimate it and look how many pages you have, and kind of figure out where the right one should go. And you can change these numbers. You can make it 0, 8, 12, 23, whatever you want the numbers to be. And so if you want to put in web or email links in a form, what I suggest is if you do have if you want to reference a website, I suggest having it pop open in a new tab, because if you don't, you're having them exit out of your REDCap survey. So I suggest having it pop into a new tab, so therefore you still have that REDCap survey behind the scenes. I mean, it's still there, and you don't have to go back to it. And then you can also set up alerts and notifications. So basically, an automated email gets sent to a particular staff member, because these are usually ideal for administrative purposes. So let's say you have your participants might be answering these questions at all hours. You don't know when they're going to be filling things out. So this way you notify the study team of a specific score, especially if, let's say a participant has suicidal ideation, you want to know right away. Um, so you can have it, what triggers, like, so this is, so you go off of which form you're looking at, and then what the branching logic is to trigger that alert. And so you get, so this is the email that gets sent off, and you can use your piping, which is your brackets, to so you know who the person is, what their score is, what did they indicate that sent this trigger. So you're getting that information right away. One thing that's available, which I really don't use too often, but people might find it interesting, is if you have your choices, and you can actually set it up so if they roll their mouse over it, like a message box kind of pops up. Um, so this is something that I just kind of wanted to point out for people that may not be aware of it, and that may actually find something, find it real useful. Um, so you just use this HTML code, stick it in, and then that will give you this message pop box. One really good thing that's I think relatively new is the multi-language management tool. So you're able to translate the text within REDCap. So if you have a multi-language, bilingual, you're recruiting English, Spanish speaking people. Um, you can use the same forms and the same variables. So one thing to know is this module does not translate the text for you. You'll have to have someone still translate the labels, the field notes, the instructions. Everything must be translated. But instead of having to like previously, we had to create separate surveys for Spanish. So you make a copy of your survey. I would make all my variables _s, and then and then have to go through and change everything. The problem was when it came time to analyzing, I had to merge all the English and then the Spanish, putting it into one data set, and then sending it off to the statistician. Now with this multi-language management tool, it's integrated into the same survey, which makes things much easier. So some things to watch out for. The grammar and word order differences between the language could make the pipes in text sound a little unnatural or a little grammatically funky. And also, if you're making updates to a project and you change some wording, you got to remember to change it in the Spanish version as well. You have to retranslate it. And when you're using it, just make sure you actually have to do save changes. So when if you stay within that module, you're good to go. But if you're going to navigate outside of it, you want to make sure you save you save your changes. So like the default is English, so we added Spanish here, and then this lists all the surveys, and you only need to translate the participant forward surveys. So the screener summary, or these biometric information, or the randomization screen, or those won't need to be translated because they're only going to be viewed by the staff. But the screener, patient contact info, your baseline surveys, those you want to turn those on to translate. So here's what it looks like behind the scenes. So right here is your variable name. In English is how did you hear about this study, and then you put in the Spanish translation here. These are your options. So each option you want to put in the Spanish version. Just remember, if you're using piping, the field embedding, excuse me, for your other, you want to make sure you put that field piping in. And so what it looks like for the participant is when they go into the screen, they'll be able to choose English or Spanish right away, and then that will kind of dissolve into the background. But if they ever want to go back and change, you can click on the blue link and it will switch it between. That makes this reappear, so you can always switch it back and forth. And just as an FYI, the three A's over here, you can the user, when they're using it, can actually increase the font size. So if they're having trouble reading it, they can increase it, or if they want more on the screen, they can decrease the size. So I'll stop right there real briefly for questions, and we'll have a few more left if there's anything we want to touch upon now, or I can kind of finish up because there's just a few left, and I want to make sure there's time at the end if anyone has anything as well. So there was a question about uh, the the accent marks. Yes, you need to make sure it's saved in the UTF-8. Um, why that didn't work, if you did do that, I am not sure. Um, but it is something that we can touch upon after. Or we can revisit, separately if you'd like. Um, so how do you export radio button data with the text but not the choice number? Um, so so you want the actual text to be shown, not the number. So for I'll jump down to the bottom one. For a missing value in a number field, you can have data staff put in the 99. What we like to do is if staff's going to be doing your entry, it's good to fill in everything, even if it's missing. So you know that a 99 was not. So you know that your staff member did not skip the score, and that it was actually skipped by the participant. Because if you looked at it without the 99 in there, you don't know, is that a staff error or is that a participant error? So it is good to, if you want to know if a person, if where the missing was, it is good to do it that way. What I suggest is just make sure you clear that out when it comes time to analyze things. Um, s- so when you export with the text, if you're exporting via Excel, there's two options, like raw data and I forget what the other one's called. Um, you'll get the text with it. Um, and then what NAT and AN stands for, you know what? I honestly don't remember off the top of my head, so I apologize. Um, so it's another question came up. What are the advantages of using REDCap versus what other competitors' products? So with REDCap, it's all the institutions, whether you be at Brown, uh, BUH, formerly Lifespan, Care New England, the VA, URI, they all have REDCap. So it is currently free at all these institutions, whereas a lot of the other ones you might have to pay for. Um, I mean, it's really what you're comfortable using. I know like Qualtrics is used a lot. Uh, I tend to use REDCap more. Um, it's really what a look or feel. Um, yeah. And then alerts, you can have alerts go to cell phones as well. Um, there is an option to send alerts to phones. Worst case scenario is if you're sending it to yourself, you can put in your email address as a phone. So if you're Verizon, there's a certain Verizon has a certain at whatever, like a VX text or something like that. So it goes out as an email, but it shows up on your phone. But there is a way to send alerts to your phone. Right? Let's see. So to kind of close things out, since we're getting close, so one thing is one thing that I like to do for projects is create a customized task list. So it's basically a roadmap to track your participants from start to finish. It kind of it keeps track of everything that a participant needs to do from the beginning. And so you can have it show certain tasks that, depending on if you're doing an RCT, depending on which group they're in, you can have certain tasks show up for certain groups. And I know we kind of touched upon this earlier, but the calculate date, you can, this has the enrollment date 7 days after, and then we pipe in the result. So we will have something show up like this. So you'll figure out every task that for your study from start to finish. And how many days out does one thing happen? Is it group specific or is it not? And then so this way, these dates are all calculated behind the scenes using the code that we just saw. And then staff will put in a done date when it's finished. And then the outcome, it's either completed or missed, and you can kind of put any notes or anything that you need to associate with that. So that kind of gives you one example there. And another thing I like to create for the projects is kind of a study status screen and a follow-up window. So when a person gets randomized, these windows get calculated automatically, so staff knows, when does this person's 3-month window start and end? When do I need to get them in by? So it tells you, what your windows are. This one has when they need to send out phone payments for certain tasks that get completed, and then also a place to kind of keep your status of each participant. Something that we tend to do is, for the participants active, we like to keep track of our randomized never started. So someone that was randomized, and then you never saw them again. They didn't do anything at all. So they still get counted in your, when you're sending your numbers to NIH or wherever, but we like to keep track of the people that were randomized but never started. If a person's dropped, if the person's dropped, they would drop by the project, did the subject withdraw? Unfortunately, did the person pass away? Or at the end of the study, we want to change them to completed. So here's some limitations with REDCap. It's not a relational database. So for me personally, I had a background in programming and SQL, and so I was used to using relational databases. Whereas REDCap it's just basically one large table instead of multiple tables. The reporting within REDCap is very limited. I'm not going to say it sucks, but it really does. So what I'll do is I may export the data into a different statistical program to make it more visually appealing. And then when you're making changes in production, you can't change the randomization scheme, and you can't change variable names once the project is is up and running. So you just gotta kind of keep in mind for those things. It's quite rigid. And then there is some offline functionality, but it's limited with the mobile app. So it's not ideal, but there is some functionality offline, but it's not the best. And then some real-time analytics. It's very limited in what can be done. So I just wanted to make sure people are aware of that. So in the closing minutes, I can kind of swing back and answer some questions. Let's see. Hannah, I'll shoot you my email afterwards to touch base. Is there a way to know who created a report? I don't, well, it would show it in the logging. And you can also limit who can create reports. So if you don't want everyone to be able to create reports, I suggest limiting those people that have rights to do it. You can check the log. If you notice a new report has shown up, you can check the logging of the project itself, and then you'll be able to see who created it. I'm not sure if there's an easier way than that. How is Spitfire? I have not used it, so I am not sure. So I apologize for not giving you help on that one, but unfortunately I have not utilized it, so I don't know. So there's a question about filtering out people who are fraudulent or using tools in REDCap. IDing the real people versus the bots. So there is the Google Capture that you can have on the very beginning. Um, but there is an IPA. You can get IP address from behind the scenes. Um, so you can pull IP address out of for when people are entering. So I'll just put my email in the chat. This What is my email? I should have had it on a form on a form. Hopefully I spelled my name right. Uh yeah, so I think that might be it. I apologize if I missed a question in there.
That's great. I think you answered all the questions that were in the chat, Chris.
Thank you.
On the screen right now is a QR code for any service consultation that you may need from Advanced RI-CTR. And Chris also put his email address in the chat so you can reach him directly. The recording will be up on our YouTube channel in a week or so, and you can go ahead and review it there. And next week, please join us for our survey design, pearls and pitfalls with Dr. Melissa Clark. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.